Today, we're going to talk about one of the most tragic and frankly avoidable disasters in modern American history. It's a story that starts with this breathtaking architectural dream and ends in an absolute nightmare. And the scariest part? It was all because of a fatal flaw that was hiding in plain sight, a breakdown in the very system that's supposed to keep us safe.
You know, this quote right here, it just nails it. This wasn't a freak accident. This wasn't lightning striking from a clear sky. It was a predictable, tragic result of human error, of people cutting corners, and of a system where professional responsibility got so watered down that in the end, it just vanished. We're going to unravel exactly how that happened, step by fatal step.
All right, so to really get this, we have to go back in time. Picture it. It's the late 1970s, and Kansas City is on a mission. It's trying to shake off its old cowtown reputation and become this sleek, modern hub. And the crown jewel of this whole transformation was going to be the brand new 40-story Hyatt Regency hotel. Now, the vision for this hotel lobby wasn't just make it nice. The goal was to create what the designers called the JC effect. And yeah, that's exactly what you think it means. They wanted a space so jaw-droppingly spectacular that when you walked in, your first words would be, Jesus Christ. And to get that effect, they designed this massive, open atrium with 3 suspended walkways, these skywalks, that were meant to look like they were just floating in midair. They weren't just for getting from point A to point B, they were part of the spectacle. So you have this huge ambition, right? But here's the problem. It was all happening inside a pressure cooker. The project was being built using a method called fast tracking. Think about it like this. Instead of designing the whole car and then building it, you start building the chassis while the engineers are still designing the engine. You pour the foundation before you've even finalized the roof. It's meant to save time and money, but what it really creates is chaos. Communication breaks down, phone calls replace careful paperwork, and dangerous assumptions start replacing solid calculations. And in that chaotic environment, things start to go wrong. In fact, a massive warning shot was fired in October 1979, before the hotel was even finished. A huge 2,700 square foot piece of that same atrium roof came crashing down. Now that should have been a screaming 5-alarm fire drill, right? A moment to stop everything and recheck every single calculation. But no, under pressure to stay on schedule and on budget, the review was limited only to the roof. The nearby skywalks hanging right there, they were never even looked at. It's a textbook example of what's called the normalization of deviance. You see a huge red flag, you ignore it, and when the whole world doesn't end that day, you subconsciously accept that level of risk as the new normal. And that sets the stage for utter catastrophe.
So that giant warning gets swept under the rug, and that opens the door for the critical mistake at the very heart of this story. And the craziest part is, it wasn't some complex failure of advanced science. It was a simple, tiny change to the design, a change that seemed like a minor convenience, but had absolutely deadly consequences.
Okay, so look at this. On the left, you see the original plan. It was simple and elegant. One long, continuous steel rod would hang from the ceiling, it would pass through the 4th floor walkway, and then continue down to hold up the 2nd floor walkway. But the steel fabricator, a company called Haven Steel, thought this would be a real pain to build. So they proposed a small change, which you see on the right. Instead of one long rod, why not use 2 shorter, separate rods? It would be so much easier to install.
So what's the big deal? Well, this seemingly innocent change created a catastrophic shift in physics. See, in the original design, the 4th floor connection only had to hold up the 4th floor walkway. That's it. The 2nd floor's weight was transferred straight up that single rod to the ceiling. But in the new design, the 2nd floor walkway was no longer hanging from the ceiling. It was now hanging from the 4th floor walkway. That meant the connection on the 4th floor had to carry its own weight plus the entire weight of the walkway beneath it. Just like that, the stress on that connection was doubled.
Here's a really simple way to picture it. The original design is like 2 rock climbers on the same rope. Each climber is holding their own weight. Simple. But the new design is like the bottom climber letting go of the rope and grabbing onto the ankles of the person above them. All of a sudden, the top climber's hands have to support not just their own weight, but the full weight of the person dangling below. Their grip, that connection point, is suddenly under twice the stress it was designed for. So, the billion-dollar question is, how did nobody catch this? Well, it was a total and complete failure of communication. The fabricators said they got approval over the phone. The engineers denied it. But what really mattered was the paper trail. The drawings showing this fatal new design were sent to the engineering firm, and they came back with a stamp that said, reviewed. Now, in the world of construction and law, reviewed is the same as approved. It was a tragic game of hot potato.
The engineers assumed the fabricator had done the math for their own change. The fabricator assumed the engineers had checked their work before stamping it. And that simple critical calculation, it was never performed, not by a single person.
And all of this brings us to the night of July 17th, 1981. The hotel has been open for a year now, and for that whole year, those flawed skywalks have been hanging over the lobby, a ticking time bomb, just waiting for the right number of people and the right vibrations to finally set it off. And on this night, all the conditions were met.
The hotel was packed. There were almost 2,000 people there for the weekly tea dance, this really popular 1940s big band night. The atmosphere was just electric. People were dancing, laughing, listening to swing music. And those beautiful floating skywalks? They were the best seat in the house to watch the party. Dozens of people crowded onto them, completely unaware that their combined weight was adding the final, fatal straw to a connection that was already screaming under the strain.
At exactly 7:05 p.m., as the orchestra was swinging into Duke Ellington's Satin Doll, a sound like a cannon blast echoed through the lobby. A single nut on a fourth-floor support rod had failed, punching right through the steel beam. The walkway dropped a few inches, paused for just a terrifying heartbeat, and then completely let go. It slammed down onto the second-floor walkway below it, and then the combined mass of both just plummeted into the crowd. In a matter of seconds, the music stopped. Everything stopped.
Let's just try to comprehend the force here. We're talking about more than 64 tons of steel and concrete. That is the equivalent of 40 cars falling 3 stories high and landing in the middle of a crowded party. The impact was just unimaginable. A scene of joy was turned into an absolute war zone in an instant.
A survivor later described this horrifyingly surreal moment right after the crash. For a second, there was this awed silence. The entire massive room just held its breath as a giant cloud of dust filled the air. And then, as the dust started to settle and people could see what had happened, the screaming began.
So in the chaos and the wreckage, the search for answers began. Forensic engineers were brought in, and they weren't looking for some mysterious one-in-a-million material failure. They were looking for the why. And what they found was a flaw so stunningly basic, so fundamentally simple, it was just unbelievable.
This chart tells you everything you need to know. The local building code required those connections to be at 100% strength. That's the law. But here's the first bombshell. Even the original design, the one they never even built, was dangerously flawed. It only met 60% of the required strength. It was designed to fail. But the change they actually made, that was catastrophically worse. It only provided a pathetic 30% of the required strength. Those walkways couldn't even reliably hold their own dead weight, let alone a crowd of dancing people.
So this wasn't just one person's mistake. It was a complete system failure. It was that perfect storm of diffused responsibility we talked about. The fabricator points to the engineer points back to the fabricator. The technician who reviewed the drawing says, hey, my job was just to see if the pieces fit together, not if they were strong enough. Everyone assumed someone else was handling the most critical part, safety. And because of that, no one.
After a tragedy of this magnitude, 114 people killed, over 200 seriously injured, things had to change. What came next was a legal and ethical earthquake that completely shook the foundations of the engineering profession. This was a moment of reckoning.
The engineer's main defense was basically, look, this is just how things are done. It's custom and practice for the fabricator to work out the details. But the Missouri Licensing Board flat out rejected that excuse. They established a landmark precedent. They ruled that the engineer of record, the person whose professional seal is on those drawings, has a fundamental non-delegable duty to the public. You cannot pass the buck. You cannot outsource safety. Your stamp is on it. You own it, period. And the engineer of record, Jack Gillum, he lost everything. His license, his firm, his entire career. But what he did next was remarkable. Instead of hiding, he spent the rest of his life traveling to engineering schools telling his story. He used his own devastating failure to teach the next generation. He would stand in front of them and say, I stamped the drawing. I am responsible. He took full ownership.
And the legacy of this tragedy is literally written into the codes that keep us safe today. The American Society of Civil Engineers completely rewrote their code of ethics to make responsibility crystal clear. Things like mandatory peer reviews, getting a second set of expert eyes on a design became standard practice. And in 2015, 34 years later, a memorial was finally built, a permanent reminder of the lives that were lost and the terrible price of negligence.
Which brings us to this one final, chilling question. And it applies to so much more than just engineering. In any team, in any company, in any complex project, When responsibility is spread so thin that everyone is a little bit responsible, does it mean that no one is truly responsible? The Hyatt Regency collapse gives us the horrifying answer. When everyone thinks someone else is in charge of safety, the tragic reality is that no one is.